To Hell and Back by Audie Murphy. So it is November 11th, and it is Veterans Day. And in honor of the occasion, I thought I would read this book, Audie Murphy's To Hell and Back. Now, if you don't know who Audie Murphy was, he was America's most decorated soldier from World War II. He won every medal that the United States military bestows, some of them more than once, I believe. Um, and he also, after the war, had a career as an actor. And I had been familiar with his name for quite some time because some of the old Western movies, like from the 50s that my grandpa watches, some of them starred Audie Murphy. And he would sometimes remark that man was the most decorated soldier America had in World War II. But I picked this book up, To Hell and Back, which is his memoir of his time in the war. And I decided to read it. And having done so now, I can safely say it sounds like those medals were well earned. So, like I said, this is Audie Murphy's recollection of his time during World War II. He was the son of a very destitute family of like sharecroppers, I think. There's like 9 kids in the family, very oversized family. And the dad left, the mom died, so they were just scrambling hand to mouth, trying to stay alive. But when World War II came to America, he decided to enlist in the military, and he was actually twice rejected, once from the Marines and once from the Air Force, I believe, due to his small physique. He was kind of on the smaller side, but he became the walking embodiment of that phrase. It's not how big the dog is in the fight, it's how big the fight is in the dog, because um, like I said, he certainly did his share in the war, actually above and beyond his share, it sounds like. And so I'm not going to like trace the whole plot of this. I mean, it's World War II. He goes to Europe, he kills some Nazis, does some heroics, wins some medals as well as some promotions and such. Again, I don't want to just get bogged down in the minutia of it because it's mainly just kind of a progression through the front lines of Europe. But so now let's talk about the ins and outs of the work. So the writing in this book is really, really strong. And I should mention now that Audie Murphy did not write this, or at least not all of it. Rather, he worked in collaboration with a ghostwriter. Although I believe he did write sections of it, but the ghostwriter who helped him pen this really deserves a commendation of their own because this book reads fantastically. I mean, this reads, well, first of all, this doesn't read like a memoir. This reads like a novel. I want to get that out there. If you pick this book up and you did not know going into it that it was nonfiction, you would think it was a novel because, first of all, I think the majority of this book is dialogue. And that really surprised me because when you read most memoirs, there's usually very little dialogue in it because people, most people can't really recall conversations verbatim. But either Audie Murphy could, or the conversations in this book are reconstructions and approximations of real conversations that happened. But a lot of this book, again, I think the majority of it is actually dialogue. And pretty snappy, sharp, witty dialogue too. But the writing in this is really, really strong. Again, it's not. It doesn't just read like a novel. It reads like a very well written novel as well. I really have to commend it for the writing. And the characters in this book are really well fleshed out. Surprisingly, actually, ironically, Audie Murphy himself is probably the least fleshed out character in the book. He you don't get that much insight into his mindset over the course of the war so much. You get flashbacks, very cinematic flashbacks to before the war when he talked with like World War I veterans, and it kind of made him want to go into the military too. But then you also get like a real sense of weariness and fatigue as the war just goes on, and he has to watch all his comrades die. Because the thing about Audie Murphy, and the thing that this book does well, when the book starts out, he's just a private in his platoon, but then as it goes on, everybody else but him gets either killed or maimed and sent home. They get removed in one way or another, and he really does become just the last man standing. And as a result of that, he gets promoted up through the ranks. I think he leaves the war as like lieutenant or something, because again, he really is just the last man standing, and you really get a sense of the loss that he feels at times, of his comrades and friends as they're just killed off one by one, and he has to witness that. But beyond that, you don't get too much insight into him. You don't get any real sense of what he wants to do after the war, or really if he has any feelings about his life before the war. It's rather thin in that regard. It's very much kind of an in the moment thing. Um, but the characters, the secondary characters, like I said, are really, really strong. You've got and by the way, this book reads. That's something else I want to touch on with this book is that um, it doesn't always read as if it was something real. In fact, once again, if you didn't know this was nonfiction going in, you would probably think that it was a fictitious story. In reading To Hell and Back, I was reminded of another war themed work, and that would be this book right here, Tim O'Brien's seminal work of Vietnam fiction, The Things They Carried. In this book, Tim O'Brien makes a distinction between two different kinds of truth. There is truth, he says, in like the sense that something factually happened, and then there's truth as in a deeper kind of human truth and emotionally resonant truth. And I really think that Audie Murphy's To Hell and Back kind of typifies that dichotomy, because I'm not entirely sure that everything in this book actually happened like it says it did, and I'm not at all second guessing Audie Murphy's combat experiences. No, the combat I'm not questioning. Rather, it's everything except the combat, which I have to kind of scrutinize because, again, it reads like almost like a cliche of a war movie. Like if you've seen Saving Private Ryan or any war movies like that, you may see a lot of familiar aspects in this book. The characters, like I was saying, the secondary characters like Novak, the Polish dude, like there's so many what you would take to be cliches if you didn't know this was true. You got the Italian dude, you got the Polish dude, you got the Indian dude, you got the redneck dude, and they all talk in like cliched kind of corny 1940s dialogue, like using the word dame a lot for women and just making off the cuff witty remarks that are just kind of again cliched. Like it feels like the script of a war movie. Again, if you didn't know it was actually true, you would think that it was like the script of a war movie. But beyond just the characters and some of the conversations they have, it's some of the interactions that they have in some of the most heated moments that I'm not entirely sure are fully authentic. And I think Audie Murphy actually used this book to kind of retroactively make some commentary about war and the plight of the men who have to fight it. Um, like another war themed book that I was reminded of when reading this was this book, Eric Maria Remarks, All Quiet on the Western Front, widely regarded to be the greatest war novel, as it says here on the title page, the cover, the greatest war novel of all time. And this book right here has a lot of similarities, I think, with To Hell and Back because of the commentary that it makes about soldiers and what they have to go back to. And that's what Audie Murphy does in this book at times. Like there's a part where the men are kind of commiserating about their situation and what things are going to look like when they go back, if they go back to civilian life. And one of the soldiers remarks, like, it's just you're not going to have any transferable skills. It's just going to be so hard to move back into civilian life because the military doesn't in this time period at least, doesn't really provide that many transferable skills for the men to utilize in day-to-day life at home, or job skills. All they really know how to do is, neutralize enemy targets. And so there's a kind of a running discussion about that in one part of this book. And I was kind of just like, is that really something that you would be thinking about in the moment? Like with All Quiet on the Western Front, that's something. This book was written well after the war was over, when Eric Maria Remarque, had to deal with that kind of thing. And it just kind of struck me. I was like, is that really a realization that you would have at that time? It seems to me that would be something that you would realize only later. But again, I think Audie Murphy was making some retroactive commentary about some things that he observed after coming home. But then in another section of the book, one of the soldiers who has just come back from leave at home, he is remarking how it's just not the same. The home you go back to is not the same as the home you left, because you're fundamentally changed, and you can't really stand all the commentary from the civilians, and how they just don't get it, and how the two mindsets of the civilian and the soldier just don't mix. They kind of clash. And again, that's like taken right out of this book, some of that. And so I think that even though this book is, presented as a memoir, I'm thinking that it's actually more akin to auto fiction. You have like an autobiography, which is like a factual recounting of things that really happened. And then you have like semi autobiographical fiction, which is a novel that's based around real events. And then you have like auto fiction, which is like a true story, but with some things, uh, you know, shifted around. And I think that is what To Hell and Back really is. I think it's auto fiction. I'm not, again, at all saying or second guessing any of Audie Murphy's combat experiences in here. I'm just saying I don't think he probably could remember all the conversations verbatim that the men in this book have. So I'm thinking that a lot of that is just like, kind of off the cuff approximations and reconstructions of that, but also some of the discussions that the men have in this book kind of touch on things that I personally think you wouldn't really realize in the moment, and is actually just Audie Murphy again retroactively saying some things through this book. But once again, to reference Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, like I said, in this book, it makes a distinction between two different kinds of truth: the factual kind and the emotional kind. And I think the emotional kind is more important at times, at least, because it's the kind that really, hits to the core. That's the point of, fiction, is that even if a story didn't literally happen, it can still have great meaning to the reader, because it says things that are, profound truths. And I think To Hell and Back does that. Again, is everything in this book authentic? Did everything go down just like Audie Murphy says, in terms of what the men said and did, especially in some of the death scenes in this book? Again, it feels like a legitimate cliche war movie in some of the death scenes, when the men, like, there's this scene in this book where one of the American tank destroyers gets hit with a shell, and the gunner, his foot gets sheared off, and he picks up his foot and he says, "There goes my dancing days." I'm like, really? Would you really say that in real life? I mean, that's something that someone would say in a movie. And so, like I say, I don't know if every last detail um, is authentic, is true. I guess, to quote No Country for Old Men, well, it is true. It is a story. And I think that's the best way to approach this. I think there is a lot of real truth in this book that isn't necessarily factual, but is still nonetheless vitally important. And that is how I would approach reading this. And now, so to rate To Hell and Back by Audie Murphy, I'm going to give this book an A. I am. This book was a fantastic read. It is marvelously well written. Again, Audie Murphy didn't write the majority of this, a ghostwriter did. But that ghostwriter deserves props because dang, this book reads very, very well. And um, the characters are by and large actually well rounded. Again, Audie Murphy himself is probably the least well rounded character in this, and you really do feel it when some of these people get killed off. You really do get a sense of the loss and the loneliness that he's prey to as he really does become the last man standing. And yeah, I think this book is really just a great read. I had such a great time reading this. I think it is honestly kind of a masterpiece and kind of a forgotten masterpiece. Now, this book was adapted into a film in the 50s by the same name, To Hell and Back, and Audie Murphy played himself in that film because the only person apparently who was badass enough to play Audie Murphy was Audie Murphy. And another thing, just to remark about this book, is that there is a certain humility with which this is written. You know, for somebody who won every major medal, every major award that the United States military can bestow, yeah, you would think that maybe he might, kind of brag about that and say, "This is when I got the Bronze Star. This is when I got the Medal of Honor." But he really doesn't. In fact, other than his battlefield promotions in this book, you really don't know when he gets awarded what. Although I will say this, the I believe, if I'm given to understand this correctly, the scene where he won the Medal of Honor, which is, I think, the highest military award which one can achieve. I think the scene in which he won the Medal of Honor happens near the end of the book, within like the last 50 pages, when after the Americans are being pushed back and routed by a German offensive, he single handedly climbs up into a burning tank destroyer, which is about, that everybody thinks is about to explode. And he gets on the gun and he single handedly holds off the Germans for quite a while and calls in artillery fire at great hazard to himself. And I think, again, I'm pretty sure that's the instance where he won the Medal of Honor. But again, you won't know reading this because it's written with a great humility. He was quite humble. He did not brag about his exploits, and he took them as a matter of course, it would seem. And so this book is really just a great read, I think. I really love this book. So yeah, I'm giving To Hell and Back by Audie Murphy an A. So, Audie Murphy's To Hell and Back. Have you read To Hell and Back? Or have you seen the film adaptation of it from the 50s starring Audie Murphy? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said here today. And if you have not read To Hell and Back, I can highly recommend this book. I think this is just a marvelous book. It's one of the most engaging memoirs that I've ever read, and that's largely, I think, because so much of it is just kind of invented in terms of the conversations, trying to flesh out the characters. But hey, it worked. It really does have quite the impact. So I'm gonna give it credit for that. If you want to read some nonfiction, some World War II themed nonfiction, or some memoirs, I think this should be right at the top of the list because dang, this book was an experience. It really was. It's again written with great humility by someone who did things that um, definitely they could have bragged about, but they chose not to. It's very engagingly written, and it has, again, quite the impact. So I could really recommend this. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.